World of Warcraft Dragon D's Nuts has been rock solid in its first 6 months on the dark web, and now its newest major patch has arrived to rope us back into hell, that being Embers of Neltharion. Developed by the pedophiles at The Blizzard, and directed by legendary video game antagonist Ian Hazardlight, it's pretty clear that we're using some black dragon as the cover for this patch, and potentially going full woke to appease the populace's need of leaving this game in the rearview mirror. Also to note, we're not on copium anymore. We're on hopium now, boys. In this exciting continuation of the fun and exciting hack and slash and bash and crash my mental state, we continue the journey of the legendary video game protagonist named Johnwarcraft on his new quest to journey into the Zarlet Cavern with the intent of discovering the secrets of an 18-year-old raid boss. Oh, wait, that's the Therian. Never mind. Regardless, we journey down here to stop the Bangin' Dragons from infusing the Loud One with Shadow Flame, experience brother versus sister conflicts, meet the inhabitants of r/feet picks, and enter a laboratory called Abberus with the intent of defeating
big, hairy, sweaty men,
lots of Dragonkin, and thumping Gary's mod himself, ripped straight from Liquid Maxim's Blizzard account. During his new quest, Johnwarcraft will also take a look at Dragonflight Season 2, including running the new and returning dungeons to find out if they're going to give me anal damage. Better brace for Halls of Infusion and Brackenhide Hollow, because you're gonna get japed. And hard. As well as checking out various small features such as Big Boy Assaults, the best raid in years, and of course, Freehold! This is the continuation of the expansion that's proving that Blizz may still have what it takes following the events of Thou Who Shall Not Be Named. Now that we're past Season 1, Vault of the Incarnate, and of course, thumping Resi, it's time to get ahead into the future and see what Blizzard has thrown into the mix to see if they could still retain their players. Which, shockingly, it's working quite well. That was until Classic Hardcore servers were announced, but it all isn't lost, because Asmongold died at level 8, so he's still a retail Andy, and retail will reign supreme. We got him, boys! This is the World of Warcraft Embers of Neltharion experience. So, welcome back. It's been a hot minute since we've been in the world of Azeroth, otherwise known as Ohio. Who can forget the hills of literally everything, and the cries of, you guessed it, dragons. We've got quite a bit to talk about in this video, so I'm going to handle this video slightly different than the last Dragonflight video. I'm going to go over some of my thoughts, both from Dragonflight launch up until now, and touching on both 10.05 and 10.07 respectively, before we get to 10.1 itself. So, if you want to skip, don't, because I'm a funny guy who likes to make jokes about what should be the game on the market. Notice how I say should be. After all, this game is now called World of Employee Harassment, and that ain't changing anytime soon. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, you should. It helps me out a ton. So I think it's only appropriate that we wind back the clock and start from the beginning. That being... So, what have I been doing in WoW over the last 6 months? Well, I managed to get AOTC for the first time since 8.3, which is honestly pretty good, considering the only AOTC that I would have gotten in between N'Zoth and Raszageth would have been Denathrius, but I wasn't into raiding at that time thanks to the hellhole that was Shadowlands. I even killed some of the bosses in Vault of the Incarnates on Mythic, and you'll be happy to know that whilst I was trying to get my 421 Whispering Incarnate icon, I sadly never got it. I mostly pushed Mythic Plus during Season 1, after changing specs to Fury. Yes, I know I was prot in the last video, but let's be real, Fury and arms are better in my opinion, so don't come at me complaining, alright? Did I time a 20 in every dungeon? No, unfortunately, but the only ones that I did time 20s in were both SPG and Court of Stars. You'll be happy to know that I never did get my Windscar Whetstone for the entire season, and I find it rather funny that all the 20s I did time weren't even Dragonflight dungeons. It's proving that this expansion might actually suck. It's also occurring to me that I basically just have horrible luck. Like, not only did I not get my Windscar Whetstone or my Whispering Incarnate icon, but I also didn't get my Best in Slot axe from Raszageth, nor the Best in Slot Mythic Plus axe until well into the season. Tier acquisition was also pretty slow as well. Getting into dungeon groups was just trying to get into a Harry Potter episode. It was all over the place. Still, I did pretty good in dungeons during Season 1 and managed to get a rating of 2600, which is pretty impressive for someone like me who, prior to this video series, had only ever timed a single 15, and that was an 8.3. I also tried some other classes outside of, well, the warrior, like Resto Druid, which in a lot of cases didn't exactly end well because, I suck at healing. Look at my guild note as the evidence. I then decided to go back to the OG, that being the Ret Paladin, after the Ret Paladin rework in 10.07, and dear god, I love Ret Paladins again. The burst damage is truly insane. You can imagine what it was like being top DPS on multiple normal raid fights. Look, I'm just saying that I know how to play a Ret Paladin better than I know how to get a life. And if anyone else thinks they're better, You're probably right. I would say that I'm better than McConnell, but let's be honest, if I said that, then I had to get shot from several thousand miles away, as well as being sued by the Penis Rocket Computer Company. Yes, I made the joke. But that's basically my Season 1 recap. It was a dope season. I haven't played this game this hard since 8.3, so I'm glad that I actually did something in-game for once, you know, instead of doing something productive. If it also helps, I've been playing like a living crap ton of classic WoW in the last few months as well. I think I've just single-handedly developed a newfound love for classic, and I really love it, so who knows, maybe you'll see a classic video at some point soon. I guess that means that retail sucks also. But let's now start touching on these smaller patches in the lead up to 10.1. I'm gonna go through these pretty quick, and I'm only gonna touch on the major stuff within these patches. So let's start with 10.05. Welcome to January of this year. Dragonflight is roughly 2 months old, and it's time for the first patch. 10.05 brings with it two major features to the game. One that is evergreen, and the other that was relevant for about 2 patches, and then when 10.1 showed up, it became completely useless. The first is the trading post, which is basically WoW's version of a battle pass.
Alright, I gotta leave, okay?
John, we just started. Come on, man.
Listen, there's a lot to see in this life. Not wasting it here.
Way to go, Blizzard. I'm sure this won't backfire at some point in the future because you're still time getting rewards due to an in-game system. Sounds like Shadowlands, to be honest. You can complete various activities during the month to get Trader's Tender, which can be used to buy items in the trading post, such as mounts, toys, and cosmetic items. It's a neat little system that is unique in some ways, but I honestly don't mind it. It's cool, and it's a nice feature to WoW for people to actually do other content in the game and to have it actually mean something. The second major feature added in 10.05 is the Storm's Fury event, otherwise known as me when I get out of bed. You can find this event in the Temporal Conflux, and it's basically just a place that you go to kill mobs and get currencies to buy catch-up gear for your alts. In a way, I kinda like to think of this event as a bigger version of the Primal Storms that we saw in both the Dragonflight pre-patch as well as on the Dragon Isles today. It still kind of uses more of the Dragonflight pre-patch approach to Primal Storms, however, with bigger portals and a big boss, rather than what's in-game today on the Dragon Isles. There's also a bunch of other smaller additions like your usual class changes, some talent reworks, and some other stuff that's not important with this patch that we won't be talking about. Moving right along, however, we got a patch that, quite frankly, does not feel like a 0.7 patch, and feels much more like a major 0.1 patch, that being 10.07. Meet 10.07, a patch that introduced quite a lot, and a lot of people consider this to be a major patch, even though it clearly isn't. The major highlight of 10.07 is the return to the Forbidden Reach. You may know it as the Evoker starting zone, but I know it as the place that Harry Styles committed suicide and embarrassed himself to the WoW community. Regardless, the Forbidden Reach is a pretty cool place. It's an island just up north of all the other Dragon Isle zones that's made to help catch up your alts, with a whole host of rares that drop buy not account 385 gear items. You can also loot Forbidden Knowledge books to upgrade those items to either 395 or 398 respectively. That way you can get your alt into some high-end M+ or heroic rating relatively quickly. Speaking of the rares on the Forbidden Reach, they're actually pretty cool.
Are you serious?
Some of them actually have some pretty unique mechanics that actually make me play the game. It makes me actually love rare mobs for once, as well as their spawn locations fitting their personalities, so props to Blizz for actually giving some love to the rare mobs. But one of the other major features of the Forbidden Reach is the Scarab Vaults, an almost Zelda-like approach to a new form of content. The vault is filled with a bunch of locked doors, and to open them, you're gonna need some keys, which you can loot through pretty much almost any means on the Forbidden Reach. There are also multiple floors and different vaults entirely, each with both fun rewards and puzzles that you'll need to complete. And you'll also be collecting items called Primordial Stones. You slot these into the Onyx Amulet, which is a ring that you can use that will equip up to 3 Primordial Stones. There's quite a lot of stones to choose from, a full list is now being shown on screen, and you can either loot them in the Scarab Vault or buy them from a vendor. However, I will continue to complain that this ring is still insanely strong for some classes, even now in 10.1, and Blizzard has already straight up said that they ain't fixing this problem until 10.15. So, good job on not listening to your players again, Blizz. 10.07 also brought with it the Ret Paladin rework, allowing them to have combos?
This is a bucket.
Dear God.
There's more.
No.
Yeah, it's nuts. I really do like the feel of Ret Paladin in its current state. If blowing everybody out of the water in DPS says anything, it's that Paladins are pretty strong in this expansion, and I love it. Another thing that came out with 10.07 is the Human and Orc Heritage Armor, and speaking of that, we should probably go do that. Matthias Shaw is of course the main protagonist of this questline, along with Vanessa Van Cleef?
Oh, no.
I'm upset that she doesn't look as sexy as she normally does. I want to see her thighs, Blizzard. Make it happen. Anyway, the entire point of the Heritage Armor questline is that the Drakefire Amulet, the very item that holds the essence of Onyxia, has been stolen, and it's up to us to find the person who stole it and retrieve it before it gets into the hands of evil. I am sure this isn't going to go bad at all and result in another instance of Blizzard using another dragon for the second time. I speak to some locals and legit think I'm kidnapped someone inside of Raven Hill, so I think I'm going to jail. I'll see you guys later. We head to the broke bum town of Moonbrook, Ohio to murder several white men before realizing that those same broke white men are gonna raid Northshire Abbey. You know, I would have preferred Goldshire. After all, business with our peers is down and you gotta help them make some bank. Arriving at Asmongold's actual birth house, or just the human starting zone, I murder every single poor white male in sight and then battle against N'Zoth for some reason to retrieve the Drakefire Amulet. Anyway, we did it, and we got a special welcome back to Stormwind for our efforts. Pretty dope for a Heritage Armor questline. I'm not going to show the Orc one because in my entire time playing WoW, which is since Legion by the way, I have never played an Orc once, and I don't plan to. Anyways, that covers pretty much everything about 10.07, so it's time to get to the big daddy herself, that being 10.1. Welcome to patch 10.1. I hope you're ready to zoom through the underground and question the antics of Thumpin' Gary. Maximum will be sad to know that his own Drakthir Evoker has betrayed him after not getting his 424 Mythic Broodkeeper staff. We kick off patch day with the cinematic, showing a Maruk getting blown to smithereens after seeing Fyrakk. And honestly, this scene gives some pretty big horror vibes, so good job on this one, Blizz. Regardless, Virnoth and Iridikron prepare to destroy the earth, and Fyrakk then charges into the ground harder than, well, I could make a bad joke, but I'd get banned for it, so I won't, and opens the way to the Zarlet Caverns. I then opened my vault to... This key is what I get every time, goddamn. Regardless, we talk to the flights on the Seat of the Aspects and get rewarded Flight Stones. This is your upgrade currency for Season 2 of Dragonflight alongside crests. You know what? Let me give a brief explanation of this whole thing. Flight Stones can be earned for pretty much all forms of content, and it basically behaves much like Valor has in previous seasons. Crests are similar to Primal Infusions from Season 1 in the sense that A, they work for item levels based on normal, heroic, and mythic item levels of raid and dungeons, and B, to get better crests, you're going to need to do harder content. You'll sometimes end up having to spend more than one crest when upgrading items, and getting these crests can take time, as you're going to need to forge them with fragments that you can get from various different forms of content. Anyways, back to the actual content itself, we finally head down to the hole near Valdrakken, and instead have to find out about the dead Maruk. You know, I would help and click on the items that it wants me to click on, but it's a little hard when a mob of players are on top of me. We make haste into the deep hole of Azeroth and arrive in the Zarlet Caverns, a place full of mysterious creatures and exciting and fun areas. Who could forget such fascinating areas such as Deep Home Joined the Blue Man Group, the Dirt Pile, the Obsidian Citadel but cracked, and my personal favorite of all, your bum after eating Taco Bell. We go through a brief scenario in which I have a lot of health and start doing a lot of DPS. Asmongold will be happy to know that I'm beating him in his numbers, but this is the only time it'll ever happen, as I'll lose in all other aspects. Fyrakk decides that these guys kinda suck and sends us to the Shadowlands, and we wake up to find that we're stuck in some crystals. However, we then meet Honeypelt, a moderator of r/feetpics, who's going to lead us to her home, otherwise known as Horny Jail, Hornyville. Yeah, that. Lots of killing occurs during the next 15 minutes of Johnwarcraft's adventure that I can't show due to YouTube censorship laws, and we arrive in the town of Loam, otherwise known as the little hobbit town where the Smurfs live. Except, these aren't mushrooms, because if they were, then I would've just walked out right then. I also stared at the Abberus raid journal, and yeah, I want this sword. The Niffin are people that rely on their scent of smell to get around, since I'm gonna guess they're blind, just like the entire White House. They also love to dig, so if you're ever wondering what that digging sound you heard was in your house, it's probably these guys, and not actually rats. We ask Honeypelt to be a guide for us, and then head to the Crystal Fields. Remember, it's Deep Home 2, people. Just saying. Anyways, we're here at a research facility to gather intel as to what Abberus actually is, and what Sarkreth might want with the artifacts that lie within. I had to murder a bunch of small balls. They're giving me PTSD flashbacks of the containment apparatuses from Halls of Infusion.
My name is Abyssian, son of Neltharion. I wish to enter.
Querent unknown. Access denied.
Huh? That's weird. We do not have time for this, Renan. Please get the door open.
Querent identified. Welcome, Scale Commander Emberthal.
This door is now racist, purely because it can only recognize evokers. We have a battle with Sarkareth before he falls to the ground, and Emberthal decides to spare him. What? You know, he wouldn't be the last boss of a raid if we had just killed him right then, Emberthal, so why won't you kill him? It's not that hard, you know. Regardless, Sarkareth escapes, and then I returned alone to see Abessian legit telling Sibelian and Rathian to stop acting like childish babies and to grow up. Holy crow, the big boy Torrent has spoken. Good job, Abessian, for being a Chad. We now make haste for the Sakali Caldera, otherwise known as the home of the
big, hairy, sweaty men
at the Zarlet Caverns, and learn that the Sakali are trying to resurrect some legendary leaders of theirs, which will end up being a world boss. We also get a shot of Shadowflame here as well, and yeah, Shadowflame is a large theme in this patch, and dear god does it look good. Anyways, I proceed to then murder several big men, Sibelian proceeds to get wounded by Shadowflame, and Fyrakk decides that it's his turn to soak up a bunch of Shadowflame. We try to stop Fyrakk from absorbing Shadowflame after this ordeal, and yeah, it doesn't go that well. What were you expecting was going to happen when two midgets, compared to a dragon that is, try to stop him from absorbing power? Yeah, you're just gonna get fisted. Loam also gets Shrek'd here, and this guy gets burned alive. It's kind of terrifying that he can't see what's happening and that all he can smell is flames. That's kind of messed up. After flying through some Shadowflame Cheeto rings, we arrive to a Loam that is now burning to the ground thanks to Fyrakk. Honestly, good job, Fyrakk. I'd rather not have to visit r/feetpips roughly once a week. We return to the seat of the aspect to let the other flights know what's going on down below. And that basically concludes the main story until Season 2 begins. From here, the Zarlet Caverns behaves a lot like the Forbidden Reach, with some fun add-ins to make the experience more interesting. Perhaps you want to go treasure hunting with the Niffin, but I'd rather not because I'm not a rat like the rest of the people I know. You can also go kill rares and complete world quests as well, if that's your thing. It's not my thing personally, because my thing is raiding in Mythic Plus, so you can imagine that after waiting a full week for the season to start, I played Classic WoW. Okay, off topic. After waiting a week, you know the first thing I had to do. You guys have no idea how excited I am for this, because I'm frothing at the mouth to get into this raid, so you know that after a week of raiding that it's time to go raid. Welcome to Abberus, the Shadowed Crucible. I hope you like lots of screaming dragons, Shadowflame, and of course,
big, hairy, sweaty men.
Because there's a lot of that inside Neltharion's bar for women. Who could forget such legendary bosses such as Mommy's Pissed, the Brother-Sister Complex, the Questionable Trifecta, my local bar on a Tuesday, Asmongold with world buffs, Discount Michael Reeves, Tiamat but he's a hoe, Deathwing Visage Form, and my personal favorite of all, Thumping Gary. Now, unlike Vaults of the Incarnates, I did actually get roughly about half the raid together worth of footage, so everything from Skarn and onward will be seen through leached footage from the Race to World First via Maximum's perspective. Don't hate me, Max. And if you're curious as to why I didn't get the rest of the footage, it's probably because Fury Warriors just aren't wanted in the game anymore. We suck AIDS, and if you want to get into anything at all, you're gonna have to murder any arms warrior in sight to assert your dominance. Most likely though is that, hey, I have a life, and I get pulled away from this game way too much. I want back in, please help.
Kazara the Hellforged!
Mommy Dragon, who clearly didn't get her feed on r/wingpicks today, is our raid opener. And yet I will continue to question why, yes, this dragon is a mount that you can own by getting a manuscript, but I will still question why it drops off Sarkareth and not Kazara. And it's on a very low drop chance, just like the very rare items from both Vaults of the Incarnates and now Abberus. Blizzard is out here making sure that if we want a new addition into our mount collections, then we gotta clear the entire raid to even have a chance of seeing a drop. But don't worry, because you probably won't get it due to the really crappy World of Warcraft Classic loot rules. Regardless, Kazara is a pretty straightforward fight, with the major mechanic on this fight being these Shadowflame rifts, which can be closed by guiding a laser that chases a player onto it. Kazara also throws her armor everywhere periodically, indicating that she's breaking free of the icy grasp that is Gary and his eternal wrath. I didn't know that Gary had a hard out for pissed off dragons. Good to know. Also to note, the use of Shadowflame in Abberus is incredible. I knew that once we saw that 10.1 was going to be centered around Shadowflame, that it was going to be a beautiful looking patch, and I, along with, I think, everyone was correct. Altogether, this fight is a solid opener to a new raid. It's not that difficult, but still poses a threat that, if you're not paying attention, it's going to kill you. At least it's not like Aeronog, where it's basically just a dead guy that we already knew, and then we have to kill him again. Also, this boss is a girl. There's qualities that I can't say due to legal reasons.
The Amalgamation Chamber!
This boss is basically just the aftermath of a brother and sister not wanting to partner up, and instead decide to fight alone. only to then realize that, hey, if we partner up, we might actually win. This sounds vaguely like the relationship between the Alliance and Horde from an expansion that was all about war, or maybe the relationship between Rathian and Sibelian for this expansion. You'll end up splitting your raid in half for this fight, with half your raid on the Shadow ad and the other half on the Fire ad. Our Shadow friend loves to drop Void Puddles on you and some non-important AoE. Our Fire Elemental, who you cannot see because, well, fire is lame, does some important AoE effects that shoot lava tornadoes everywhere and does some soaks and whatnot. Once both ads have reached 50%, both ads then merge together to form one big Shadow Flame amalgamation, which basically does a mix of both of their previous abilities. Who could forget abilities such as a Frontal, a big soak that is both a soak and a GTFO ability, as well as Taco Bell tornadoes. Altogether, this is a solid fight that I think plays really well, and while I haven't progressed it in, say, Heroic yet, I'm definitely ready to see what this fight has to offer. Just make sure these guys fix their issues with the relationship, okay?
The Forgotten Experiments!
This fight is kind of like the council fight of this raid, with some rather strange abilities that make this fight feel like a collage of different bosses from past raids.
I don't like where this is going.
You'll face 3 different Drakthir separately on normal and heroic, Neldris being the first, in which he does a roar that shockingly isn't a GTFO mechanic, and a bleed that reminds you of the bleeding that the furry community got when Drakthirs were announced. And I mean the good kind of bleeding for them. Next up is Thadrian, with the volatile spew that makes you have PTSD flashbacks of Azure Vaults, big arcane orbs that also give you PTSD flashbacks of being a melee on Azure Blade, and your typical AoE abilities that you can use your CDs on. And finally is Ryanthus, with several evoker abilities such as Disintegrate and Temporal Anomaly, which is literally just a soccer ball that you have to kick to make sure it doesn't reach the boss. He also has a deep breath that you have to dodge, otherwise it puts a nasty dot on you that will basically kill you pretty quick. Some notes on this fight is that on Mythic, instead of say the second boss spawning after the first dies, they will now show up at 50% each time, meaning that there will be times when you'll have 2 bosses out at once. Additionally, you cannot kick that ball forever, as you'll start getting a stacking dot that increases the damage you take when you hit it. I guess I could say that this fight is by far the most interesting in this raid thus far, with some strange mechanics that, to its name, kind of feel forgotten. I'm gonna keep my eye on this fight, mostly because these guys will probably combat res and then come and beat my butt.
Assault of the Sakali!
Welcome to what literally is the boring fight of Abberus. Similar to the Amalgamation Chamber from earlier, you're going to be splitting your raid in half onto 2 different platforms. The boss will hop in between both, whilst a whole host of ads come up from the walls of Neltharion's crib to attack you, letting you know that you probably should have grabbed your world buffs before heading inside. You can actually loot these rocks that spawn on the playing field and drop them on these ads before they reach the top to stop them from getting up, so at least that's unique. But what's not unique is this hunter named Tim the Fat Man. Yes, not Tim the Tat Man. I'm guessing he's actually fat in disguise. Oh, by the way, we wiped in the first pull because both tanks were on one side of the raid. Fury Warrior tanking, let's go! But overall, this fight is just your standard AoE Khaleef fight, with some interrupts here and there, a shield to break on one ad, and then a simple burn phase once the boss is at 20% health. It's probably the most forgettable fight in this raid, which is pretty upsetting because these are big, hairy, sweaty men we're dealing with here, and the Sakali make themselves out to be pretty big and tough, but they clearly aren't here, so...
Rashok!
Sup y'all, it's me, it's your boy Asmongold, and today we're going to be teaching you how to make a raid boss that feels good to play every time, otherwise known as either Asmon when he doesn't get the loot, or Asmon when he's fully buffed. Otherwise known as Sludge Fist Sigma Chad Edition, Rashok is a fight that everybody has been waiting to fist really hard since the announcement of Abberus a few months ago. I've loved every pull I've done on this fight, mostly because every group that I have been in has been me complaining to the tanks that they can't do the fight right, and my raid leading attitude still exists nearly 3 years later after I left the scene because of this. Rashok can be compared to your boy Asmongold in a few ways. He has a pretty small amount of abilities, but for what he does have, they hit pretty hard, and it's a challenge to overcome. Rashok wants to win the battle, and he will do everything he can to do so, which also means challenging your local Twitch chat. Also, I'm pretty sure that the last time Asmon did something like this, he lost a mount off, so I mean, accompanied by the gaze, let me explain the mechanics, because if I don't, then you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. Rashok decides that he's going to smash a player's head in with his slam ability, and launch fireballs out of all active head slams in the room. I told you not to piss him off, didn't I? He also does a soak that requires several people to do it. Oh, by the way, don't let him reach 100 energy, because he'll just go into sicko mode and wipe the raid. Instead, run him into the center of the room at around 80 to 90 energy, and that way he can drain all of it in a big burst of AoE, in a transition that just looks incredible. Tank swap here is also neat, with tanks needing to take 2 different debuffs and then taunt, and if they get hit after they get their debuffs, then they run the risk of dying. There ain't no room for error in this one, so bubble hearthing might actually be a good option. This is a fight that I think a lot of people are gonna love on farm, both for its simplicity and challenge. I have my reasons to farm him as well, since my best inside raid pants drop from this guy, so you better get your nards ready, Rashok. I'm coming for my pants.
Skarn, the Vigilant Steward!
This big hunking turd of a dragon is another unique boss that takes the concept of bombs and adds and switches it up a bit. Skarn's big mechanics are shrapnel bombs, which can be ran into to destroy, as well as traps, which can go off throughout the fight. There are also these golems that spawn that can both set and activate those traps, but don't worry, as these golems can be CC'd in any way you want, so best recommended to hop over and kill them quick. When the golems do die, players can loot an item off them to disable traps on the playing field, so that way you can have better movement so you don't get overwhelmed. Your group's off-tank will want to be running into these big bombs on the ground, as when explosions go out from these bombs, they will explode and wipe the raid. Paladins will also be happy to know that they can help out too by using Divine Shield. Sure, the actual running into the bomb explosion does raid AoE, I think, but at least you won't be dead thanks to Divine Shield. This fight is actually pretty dope, and it's a unique take on an ad fight that makes the ads feel like they have much more of a relevant threat. Although I will admit, this guy kind of feels like a bit of a discount Michael Reeves. I mean, think about it for a second. He makes golems and machines to defeat his enemies. Nobody asked for it, nobody needs it, and yet he made it anyway. Skarn, I'm going to have to ask you to give Michael Reeves a call. I think you two would make a great collab together. Just don't come at me later with this head in the palm of your head, okay?
Magmorax!
The best way that I can describe this fight is, it's a patchwork fight. This boss hardly really has anything going on, with the most major thing being Molten Spittle, which drops flame pools on the ground that, when soaked, will slowly shrink. You're going to want to shrink these, as they'll overwhelm you pretty quick, and they spawn more frequently in higher difficulties, I think. Unless you're someone that just really likes to feel their bum experiencing a Taco Bell after party, you better listen to me. And that's not saying that you don't like having a burning bum, but hey, I ain't gonna judge. I don't want to say that this fight is going to be difficult in higher difficulties, but I will say that Magmorax's placement in Abberus feels a bit odd. Now again, this ain't that bad considering we've seen worse, but I feel as though Magmorax could have been a bit earlier in the raid just to piss people off, knowing that they were going to have to hit the DPS check on the second boss. That way we can get the adult babies out of the raid early and not have to worry about it. I'm looking at you, McConnell. The boss also does a massive knockback, so just be ready for when you get punted in the lava, and there is, you guessed it. So, I hope you have your Taco Bell protection card on you, because of the amount of lava that there is in this fight, you're gonna need it.
Echo of Neltharion!
Oh man, where do I begin with this fight? Neltharion, I thought you were dead. Didn't we kill you in Cataclysm? Like, why are you here? This fight has got a lot of walls, letting you know the paywall that you need to enter this raid and kill this guy for the third-ish time. The payment is $15 a month, by the way. He also legit, and get this, absolutely slaps the tank across the playing field by shattering their soul and breaks the walls like they're Lego bricks. What? What the fuck? Now that is a dope raid mechanic. If you're not a tank, you can also break walls, as you're gonna need to do this because this big fire circle is, quite big. During his second phase, you'll need to kill some Void guys, because, I mean, come on, this is Neltharion we're talking about, and if there wasn't Void involved in this fight, would not make sense at all.
Are you sure about that?
On Heroic and Mythic, some people will get MC'd, and only they can see the Void mob, so you better know what you're doing, otherwise you're gonna get blamed for the wipe. I'm looking at you, Paladin, stop face rolling the keyboard. Otherwise, you're gonna kill these three guys whilst dodging the way too many rocks that are coming from somewhere, and then enter phase 3. You're gonna want to stand in these Void portals when he casts Ebon Destruction. Not too early, but right towards the end of his cast. If you're not in these, you're gonna die, and surrender to our Lord and Savior, N'Zoth. There's some ads to kill as well, because, I mean, they're Courser's ads, and that's basically the fight in a nutshell. This is actually a really solid fight, with lots of unique mechanics that are cool in their own ways. And I like that the Void stuff in this fight isn't that over the top, but it's still relevant to let you know that, hey, Neltharion practiced the art of the Shadow Priest through training with Albani, and failed massively. Just don't mess up, because if you do, then Neltharion is gonna win. It will have to experience the pain that is World of Warcraft Cataclysm Classic for the PC, and nobody wants that, not even me, a retail Andy.
Scale Commander Sakharov!
It would seem that Gary, otherwise known as Maximum's Evoker, has gone rogue, and is attacking the local population of Sigma males and robbing them of their McDonald's Happy Meals. So we gotta stop him. Sarkareth is a rather strange fight, with this dot that needs to be removed with either Mass Disintegrate or Oppressive Howl. I'm not sure if this is a mythic mechanic, but it's there. Which will also help make sure that the raid leader knows why you're dead prior to phase 2. He also does a breath, I mean, he's an evoker, so obviously. And he'll phase and send out a bunch of void dots and send everybody to Maxor's basement, where you'll run through some swirlies and then get sent back up again. There's also these tier-like things when you go downstairs that give you extra haste, so that's also dope. There's also a bomb that you want to let go off when you're downstairs, so that it doesn't wipe upstairs, as well as meeting with even more ads, because I mean, let's be honest, this is the last fight of the raid. What were you expecting, a single target raid fight? Yeah, no. There's also some puddles that you don't want to stand in, otherwise you'll be sent to another dimension known only as the Shadowlands. Phase 3 Gary becomes a void abomination, does a big GTFO circle, spawns more ads, spawns a group soak that's almost identical to the group soak from Primal Council, does a literal line of sight mechanic, and throws out random balls that drop from the skies above. This fight seems honestly pretty strange and confusing for it being a final raid boss. It's definitely got the difficulty, sure, but this is probably one of those fights that from a video looks simple, but in practice is harder than you'd expect. I just hope that Gary achieved his goal of hopefully getting back at his false daddy figure, as Neltharion is not his father. I'm pretty sure it's Liquid Max. Overall, Abberus is a pretty solid raid, with both interesting and great fights to back it up. I'm gonna be here a lot, and I can't wait to kill Heroic Sarkareth in like 3 months, because let's be honest, that's how long it took to get my last AOTC in Vault of the Incarnates. Before we head into our next segment though, let's touch briefly on the world events that are in 10.1, which mostly includes the Fyrakk assaults. This is basically just what happens when one of the bangin' dragons eats way too much Taco Bell and then shizzed it all over the populace. There's also another one in the Zarlet Cavern somewhere, but I mean, who gives a crap, let's be real. But with this, it's time to move on to our final segment of the video, Mythic Plus. I'm not talking about PvP unlike the last video because, let's be honest, it's mostly the exact same every season generally, so why would I need to explain it? I'm making all the PvPers pissed off, and to that I say good. While yes, I've touched on all 8 of the Dragonflight dungeons in the previous video, I will be touching on them again in their Mythic Plus variants here. So I hope you're ready to clench your cheeks, because this stuff is gonna hurt. A lot of things may have changed or have been hotfixed after this video goes out, so bear in mind that everything I'm going to say during this segment is based on the launch week of Dragonflight Season 2, and will not include the first fortified week of the season. So with that out of the way, let's start off with the Dragonflight dungeons first, and kick things off with
Brackenhide Hollow!
You know, I remember saying something to the effect of, I have no idea what this dungeon is going to be like in Season 2, so we'll just wait and see. And yeah, this is a mixed bag for me. Trash generally does hit pretty hard, and it hits fairly too. I still hate this guy's Rage Storm, there's still quite a lot of poison dots, so I hope you like pressing cleanse in your rotation, because you're gonna have to do it again. The bosses generally don't have that many issues, apart from the last boss that can definitely be an issue with the Rotting Totem, so just watch out. Overall, it's better than I was expecting, and there is some small nerfs that have been addressed to Brackenhide within the launch of Season 2, so I think this one's going to be okay, which I don't think can be said for this next dungeon.
Halls of Infusion!
Halls has been a dungeon that I've been dreading since the last few weeks of Season 1. Admittedly, it's not as bad as I thought though.
So thank God that's over. I mean, it's over, right? There's not more, right? I mean...
The trash seems pretty reasonable, apart from the poisons and dispels that are going to make things like priests, druids, paladins, and other classes be a must when doing this dungeon, so good luck everybody else. I also finally figured out the power overload mechanic on the first boss. It drops it on the ground once it expires, so you're intended to stack and then move out after it's dropped to maximize the space in the room. And make sure that those golden orb things aren't dropping on the boss during the intermission, because it'll make it bigger. The third boss is a boss that, guess what, still kills people. I didn't realize that there were actually broken crystals until I looked it up on Wowhead, and in my opinion, that's kind of messed up. Overall though, this place is better than I expected, but that doesn't mean that it's still got its issues. Just like prior to its hotfix, and honestly, I still can't tell. If you died, good luck running back from the start of the dungeon to the end of it with no skip. Thanks for the hotfix, Blizz. I'm not entirely sure if it's there because I haven't seen it since.
Neltharion!
Remember how I said that Neltharion was going to be the easy dungeon of this expansion? Well, for the most part, that actually stays true.
Dear God.
Trash hits pretty solid, so do most of the bosses, but the biggest issue for me is the last boss with her magma shield. You have to loot gold coins to throw them at the boss to weaken her shield, and my main problem is the massive amounts of AoE that this boss is pumping during this time. It's like she's realizing that we're here to steal her paycheck that she's earned at Blizzard and is trying to repel us away. All I ask is just to nerf this AoE damage just a little bit so that it's still lethal, but people can afford to mess up once or twice. Otherwise, Neltharion is a pretty solid dungeon with the great mix of deadly mechanics mixed with a variety of abilities for players to deal with. I just hope that the Sakali can win me over after the shiz show that was their fight in Abberus.
Ultimate Legacy of Tyr!
Ultimate is a strange one for me. Trash wasn't really that big of an issue, and they hit as hard as you'd expect and don't have much going on. The main issue here were the bosses, with their abilities scaling a little higher than I was expecting. This is mostly shown in both the Lost Dwarves and Bromok fights, with just a large amount of damage and dodging that you have to do, making it so that you just end up losing DPS. It's a little overwhelming in some instances, which can be a good thing, but in a lot of cases it can also be a negative. With Bromok, it's a bit much, as you're having to deal with both the Quaking Totem, interrupt this ad, and keep the boss and ads on your tank, and and make sure you're killing them quickly before the next set of them comes out. Blizz is trying to see how quick we are to react if we know that something is going to go downhill. Sounds like how Shadowlands went down. Chrono Lord Deos can be overwhelming with all of his sand puddles, so just be ready to have the common theme of you're running out of space. I can't wait to see if this mechanic returns in his fight in the Mega Dungeon and 10.15, as let's be real, it probably will be back. Moving into our legacy dungeons in the pool, we're gonna go from oldest to newest, so let's kick things off with
The Vortex Pinnacle!
Wait, what? Blizzard, I thought you said you weren't going back further than Mists of Pandaria when you said you were making Legacy M+ dungeons, yet this is clearly from Cataclysm, so did you lie again, Blizz? Are we gonna get to Season 3 of Dragonflight and see Halls of Lightning M+ or something, or I don't know, maybe the Oculus M+? Regardless, I think Vortex Pinnacle was the best choice here, because let's be honest, did you really want to do Grim Batol or Stonecore again? I like that the trash in Vortex Pinnacle is actually surprisingly unique. Some of these mobs you have to stare down like it's a game of peekaboo so they don't attack you. Others you have to stand in lightning triangles to avoid damage, and you got your standard pull them out of the green circle, some cyclones you gotta disrupt, general stuff. The bosses are also pretty solid here too, apart from Alteris. Now, I don't hate this guy, but in my opinion, he's got a lot going on. He's always controlling the wind around him, and if you're not standing in the right part of that wind, you end up losing haste. Way to make me feel slow, just use the wind and call it a day. Good one, Blizz. He also has tornadoes around the room, but you actually want to use these tornadoes to jump over a white line on a floor that's white, in a dungeon that's mostly white, to avoid it. Yep, that's a mouthful. This fight is probably going to be the one that breaks up pug groups, and it will be a major roadblock regardless if it's a tyrannical or a fortified week, so just be ready to see most of your disbands come from this guy.
Neltharion's Lair!
Welcome to the dungeon that is both good and bad at the same time. What I mean by that is that there is some stuff in this dungeon that hits harder than my imaginary waifu, whilst at the same time, there is an equal amount of stuff that just slips across your cheeks. The third boss on week 1 of the season was incredibly bugged, as apparently its poison sprays were being targeted by everybody and not like one person, so I hope to God your healer knows their shiz, because if they don't, then you're gonna die. Dargrul is also kinda weird as well, because his fire ad does way too much damage, so much damage in fact, that it's a pretty big challenge to get this guy to run into a pillar so that you can stun him and kill him. I just hope that you're being careful with your CDs in this dungeon, because if there's any place in the game to use them, then it's here. I'm thankful that none of my best in slot comes from here. God dang it!
The Underrun!
Who could forget the dungeon that perfectly replicates a glory area gone wrong, complete with everything that Blizzard can do to make us feel even more disgusted with them. This dungeon is one of my favorites from BFA, and it actually plays out quite well. Everything hits right, nothing feels overtuned, and the small additions of mobs and whatnot make this dungeon feel fresh, whilst, let's be real, being the exact same. I just hope that a tentacle monster ain't going to eat me. After all, half this dungeon is just tentacle henty waiting to be written. I'm looking at you, henty artists, get your pens and pencils, because I'm giving you free real estate. Freehold! You knew this was coming. Arguably the best dungeon in the entire game, Freehold is pretty much in the same boat to that of Underrot, in the sense that everything feels spot on where it should be. The small additions and the change to make the Pirate Council be the same all the time makes for a much better experience. I mean, come on, if you don't like Freehold, then you're racist. I'm saying it now. Who doesn't love pirates who smoke lots of crack and drink beer 24/7 and don't have wives? I sure do. If you're doing dungeons this season, I highly recommend playing Freehold a lot. Its enemies and bosses are relatively simple, yet still poses lots of challenges. Its routing is also straightforward, but it can be changed to fit whatever kind of affixes or changes that may come from week to week. And I mean, it's Freehold. You're gonna like it or I'm gonna kill you. So, what are my final thoughts on World of Warcraft's newest patch, Embers of Neltharion, as well as its lead-up patches? Well, there's quite a lot to cover here, so let's start from the beginning. 10.05 brought some light changes and additions to the game, many of which were all positives. While the Storm's Fury event is mostly abandoned today, for when it was current, it was a nice added bonus for alts looking to get some basic starter gear, and it took advantage of a system already put in place and expanded upon it. The trading post is still running to this day, shocking, and it's a neat system that provides cosmetic rewards that are pretty nice. Although time getting items behind it can be a bit annoying, so Blizzard, just fix that. 10.07's Forbidden Reach is honestly one of the best patch zones I've played in a long time, with loads of activities to do on the island, from killing rares, completing side quests, or plundering the Scarab vaults. The Forbidden Reach was something that did not feel like a 0.7 patch, and it felt much more like a major 0.1 patch in a number of ways. 10.1's new zone, the Zarlet Caverns, is honestly kinda mid. It's essentially just more of the Forbidden Reach, but in a different map. There's still rares, there's still events, there's still world quests, and that's kind of about it. Sure, there are some unique minigames with the Niffin, but let's be honest, that's for the people that r/feet picks to do, and not me. The overall look of the Zarlet Caverns is honestly pretty cool, and I think that even if a zone is kinda mid, it can still look pretty good. The exception here is Korthia, but we don't talk about that shit show. Abberus is single-handedly one of the best raids, visually, in years. I love the Shadowflame aesthetic that the devs went with for 10.1, and I would love to see more of this happen in the future. The bosses in Abberus are also pretty good, with lots of unique mechanics spread throughout. The fights aren't that complicated either, so even the most average player can step into Abberus and not really struggle. Mythic Plus feels better than ever, with the removal of seasonal affixes and with the introduction of new affixes that I didn't show, cause I'm cringe, come at me. The fixing of a lot of other affixes and reshuffling the affix buckets has made Mythic Plus far more fun than it was during Season 1. I can't wait to continue playing throughout Season 2 and enjoying every second of it. We have lots to look forward to as we charge in the second half of Dragonflight, with 10.15 Fractures in Time already being revealed just days after Season 2 started, featuring the augmentation evoker, allowing Harry Styles to have a chance to shine in a future video. That might be some foreshadowing. The dawn of the Infinite Mega Dungeon, featuring bosses such as Iridikron, Galakron, Morchi, and the last boss of Uldaman. I knew he'd be back later. There's also a dragon riding event in Kalimdor, so that confirms that dragon riding is going to be in the old world, which is insanely dope. And even some class reworks are on the way, with Mage being already confirmed as of the making of this video. I cannot wait to see what's next after Embers of Neltharion, and what awaits Dragonflight in its next major patch of 10.2. This expansion is looking to rewrite the history books, and so far, it's doing a pretty solid job. But until then, it's time to end. My name is PandaPowerSauce, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.